Pay attention to the surveillance footage from St. Mary's Cemetery in Silver Creek, New Mexico. Watch the grainy night vision recording from November 2nd, 2018. See that figure moving between the gravestones at 2:47 a.m.? That's Dr. Marcus Vellinger, and he's carrying something in a metal case. Notice how he keeps looking over his shoulder, how he stops at that old mausoleum and disappears inside. The camera loses him for exactly 18 minutes. When he emerges, the case is empty and his hands are shaking. What you're about to hear is the story of a man who spent 10 years hiding what he believed was proof of extraterrestrial life beneath a graveyard. But the truth? The truth is so much darker than anyone could have imagined. You know that feeling when you look up at the stars and wonder if we're alone in the universe? For most of us, it's just a passing thought, maybe something we ponder on a clear night. But for Dr. Marcus Vellinger, that question consumed every waking moment of his life. Marcus was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that gets you recruited by NASA straight out of MIT. He'd spent 15 years working on aerospace propulsion systems, classified projects that even his wife, Catherine, wasn't allowed to know about. He was respected, admired, the kind of scientist who gave lectures at conferences and had a wall full of commendations. But in 2007, something changed. Marcus was dismissed from NASA. The official reason was budgetary restructuring, but people who worked with him told a different story. They said he'd become obsessed with UFO research, that he'd been caught using agency resources to investigate alleged crash sites, that he'd violated security protocols trying to access classified files about extraterrestrial encounters. Catherine filed for divorce 6 months after his dismissal. He wasn't the same person anymore, she told investigators years later. He would stay up all night, drawing diagrams, talking about electromagnetic signatures and government cover-ups. I tried to help him, but he pushed me away. He said I wouldn't understand, that no one would understand, until he proved it. After the divorce, Marcus moved back to his hometown of Silver Creek, New Mexico. Population 3,200, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest excitement is usually the annual county fair. He bought a small house on the edge of town, near the old cemetery where 3 generations of Vellingers were buried, including his grandfather who died in 1963. And then Marcus Vellinger disappeared from public life. For 11 years, he became a ghost, a recluse. The brilliant NASA scientist turned into the weird guy who lived alone and didn't talk to anyone. But Marcus wasn't just hiding from the world. He was hiding something from the world, something he believed would change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. March 17, 2008. According to Marcus Vellinger's meticulously kept journals, this was the day everything changed. The day that justified all his research, all his preparation, all the years of people calling him crazy. Let me paint you a picture of what Marcus claimed happened that night. He'd been tracking unusual electromagnetic readings in the White Sands Desert for weeks, using equipment he'd built himself in his basement workshop. Highly illegal equipment, by the way, the kind that could interfere with military radar systems and aviation communications. At 11:43 p.m., his instruments lit up. A massive electromagnetic signature, moving at speeds that defied conventional physics. Marcus grabbed what he called his containment device, basically an experimental EMP weapon he'd been developing in secret, loaded it into his truck, and drove out into the desert. His journal entry from that night reads like science fiction. Object descended approximately 200 yards ahead, ovoid shape, approximately 15 feet in diameter, exhibiting luminescence in blue-white spectrum. Deployed containment pulse at 0017. Object's propulsion system appeared to fail. Craft descended rapidly. According to Marcus, he found the craft partially embedded in sand, and inside, strapped into some kind of pilot's chair, was what he'd been searching for his entire life, an extraterrestrial being. Now here's where Marcus's story gets even stranger. He claimed he managed to extract the being from the craft, that it was still alive but unconscious. He loaded it into his truck, used some kind of sedative he'd acquired, and drove back to Silver Creek. By sunrise on March 18th, Marcus Vellinger had what he believed was an alien entity hidden in his basement. But he couldn't keep it in his basement forever. Too risky. His ex-wife still had a key. Utility workers might need access. The house could be searched if anyone got suspicious. That's when Marcus thought of the cemetery. St. Mary's had been abandoned by the church in 1995. The land was still consecrated ground, technically protected, but no one maintained it anymore. More importantly, the old Vellinger family plot sat above a natural limestone cave system. Marcus had explored those caves as a kid. Over the next 3 months, Marcus worked in secret. He excavated a tunnel system beneath the cemetery, using the Vellinger mausoleum as his access point. He installed a sophisticated preservation chamber, complete with temperature control, monitoring equipment, and a custom-built restraint chair. He diverted electricity from the town's grid in a way that wouldn't raise flags. He created an entire underground laboratory. And on June 3, 2008, Marcus moved his specimen to its final resting place beneath the graveyard. For the next 10 years, Marcus Vellinger lived a double life. To the people of Silver Creek, he was the weird hermit who occasionally came into town for supplies. But several nights a week, he would visit the cemetery in the dead of night, descend into his secret laboratory, and conduct what he believed was the most important research in human history. His journals are something else. Hundreds of pages of observations, measurements, theories. He'd given the being a designation, Subject Alpha. He documented everything, its physiology, elongated cranial structure, approximately 4 feet tall, limbs that seemed too long for its body, its skin, which he described as having an almost translucent quality with a pale gray-white coloration. Those distinctive almond-shaped eyes that stared out from that preserved face. Marcus took samples, ran tests, tried to understand what he'd found. He was convinced Subject Alpha was proof that humanity wasn't alone, that everything the government had been denying for decades was real. But here's what Marcus didn't know. He wasn't as invisible as he thought. In 2015, the Defense Intelligence Agency detected unusual energy signatures emanating from Silver Creek. Nothing major, nothing that would have raised immediate alarms, but enough to warrant a flag in their system. When they ran background checks on the area, one name popped up. Dr. Marcus Vellinger, former NASA contractor, dismissed under suspicious circumstances. The DIA started a file, started watching, and they noticed things. Marcus had been ordering equipment through various online vendors, liquid nitrogen systems, radiation shielding, biotechnology equipment that required special permits. He was using fake names, having things shipped to P.O. boxes in different towns, but the DIA has ways of tracking these things. By 2016, Marcus Vellinger was under active surveillance. Federal agents had tapped his phone, monitored his internet usage, and even installed cameras on the road leading to the cemetery. But they were being patient. They wanted to know what he was doing before they moved in. Then, on November 2, 2018, cemetery groundskeeper Tom Hawkins reported something that would break the case wide open. Tom was a local guy, had been maintaining St. Mary's on a volunteer basis for years, even though the church no longer funded it. He'd noticed that the Vellinger mausoleum door had been disturbed, fresh scratches on the old iron gate, signs that someone had been inside recently. But what really got Tom's attention was the sound, a low, mechanical humming coming from beneath the ground. He pressed his ear to the earth near the mausoleum and felt vibration, like machinery running underground. Tom called the sheriff's office. Sheriff's Deputy Maria Gonzalez came out to investigate. She heard it too. That's when she called the state police. And when the state police started digging into who owned the Vellinger plot, they found the federal flag on Marcus's file. Within 24 hours, the FBI and DIA had a tactical team assembled. They had thermal imaging showing an underground structure beneath the cemetery. They had years of surveillance footage showing Marcus entering and leaving the mausoleum at odd hours. They had procurement records showing he'd bought enough equipment to build a small laboratory. On November 3, 2018, at 6 a.m., federal agents executed a search warrant on both Marcus Vellinger's home and the St. Mary's Cemetery. Marcus was arrested at his home without incident. He didn't resist, didn't try to run. When FBI agent James Porter informed him that they knew about the cemetery, Marcus actually smiled. "Finally," he said, "someone who will take this seriously." While agents searched Marcus's house, seizing his computers and journals, a separate team was entering the Vellinger mausoleum. What they found beneath that cemetery would spark one of the strangest investigations in FBI history. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the mausoleum. Someone had put real work into this. The tunnel descended about 20 feet, carved through limestone, reinforced with concrete. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet. And there, in the center of that underground laboratory, illuminated by fluorescent lights running on stolen electricity, was Subject Alpha. Agent Porter had been with the FBI for 18 years. He'd seen a lot. But when he first laid eyes on that thing sitting in its restraint chair, he felt his stomach drop. It looked alien. That's the only way to describe it. The oversized head, the elongated limbs strapped to the chair's armrests, those black almond-shaped eyes staring out at nothing, the pale, almost translucent skin, the small, slit-like mouth. Around the chamber, Marcus had set up his laboratory, monitoring equipment, refrigeration units, shelves lined with journals and tissue samples in sealed containers, a laptop running data collection software, medical instruments that had no business being in a private citizen's hands. "Get forensics down here," Porter told his team, "and call the CDC. We need to know what we're dealing with." Marcus was transported to the FBI field office in Albuquerque for questioning, and this is where things got strange. Because Marcus wasn't acting like a man who'd been caught doing something illegal, he was acting like a man who'd just been vindicated. "You found it," he kept saying. "You found Subject Alpha. Now you know I was telling the truth. Now you know they're real." Agent Porter conducted the first interview. Marcus waived his right to an attorney. He wanted to talk, needed to talk. He'd been keeping this secret for 10 years, and now he could finally tell someone. Marcus walked them through everything. The electromagnetic tracking on March 17, 2008. The craft in the desert, finding Subject Alpha inside, bringing it back to Silver Creek, building the preservation chamber. 10 years of research and documentation. "Do you understand what this means?" Marcus asked, his eyes bright with conviction. "This proves everything. Area 51, Roswell, all of it. The government's been lying for 70 years, and I have the proof." But here's the thing about Marcus's story. The federal agents weren't buying it. Because while Marcus had been conducting his research, the FBI had been conducting their own, and what they were finding was raising some serious red flags. The forensic team examining Subject Alpha noticed something immediately. The preservation method was too good. The specimen showed no signs of decomposition, which made sense if it had been kept in the climate-controlled environment Marcus had created. But there were other details that didn't add up. The skin texture wasn't consistent. Some areas appeared organic, but others had what looked like seams, joints that seemed mechanical rather than biological. And when they started taking x-rays, they found something that changed everything. There were no internal organs, no skeletal structure that made biological sense. Instead, there appeared to be a framework of metal and plastic carefully constructed to hold everything together. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic anthropologist brought in from the Smithsonian, examined Subject Alpha for 6 hours. Her preliminary report was delivered on November 5, 2018. "This is not a biological entity," she wrote. "This appears to be a constructed specimen utilizing modified primate remains, prosthetics, synthetic materials, and taxidermy techniques to create the appearance of an extraterrestrial being. Let me paint you a picture of what Dr. Chen found. The skull, modified chimpanzee cranium, enlarged with resin and sculpted to create that distinctive alien shape. The eyes, custom-made glass replicas designed to look otherworldly. The skin, a combination of preserved animal hide and synthetic latex, carefully stitched and blended to create that translucent, pale appearance. The limbs had been extended using metal rods and synthetic materials. The joints were mechanical. The whole thing was a creation. An incredibly detailed, meticulously crafted creation, but a creation nonetheless. When Agent Porter brought this information back to Marcus in the interrogation room, something happened that Porter would later describe as one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed. Marcus refused to believe it. Not just refused, he couldn't process it. He insisted they were wrong, that they were part of the cover-up, that the government was trying to discredit his discovery. "You're lying," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You found it. You saw it. You can't just pretend it's not real because it's inconvenient for you." "Marcus," Porter said carefully, "we need to talk about where you really got this specimen, because if you created it, that's one thing. But if you obtained these materials illegally—" "I didn't create it!" Marcus screamed. "I found it! March 17th, 2008, White Sands Desert! It was in the craft! Why won't you believe me?" But here's what made it even more horrific. The FBI started tracing the materials Marcus had used. The primate remains? They matched a specimen that had gone missing from a university research facility in 2007. Marcus had been consulting there as a guest lecturer. The prosthetics? Custom ordered from a special effects company using a fake name. The synthetic materials? Purchased from multiple suppliers over several years. Marcus Vellinger hadn't found an alien. Marcus Vellinger had built one. The investigation took a darker turn when FBI forensic accountants started digging into Marcus's financial records, because building an elaborate fake alien and underground laboratory isn't cheap. Where was Marcus getting the money? Turns out Marcus had been selling pieces of his discovery. Not the specimen itself, that was too precious, but evidence from the alleged crash site. Fragments of metal he claimed were from the craft. Soil samples from the desert. Photographs. All of it fake, all of it fabricated, but all of it sold to UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists through dark web marketplaces. Between 2010 and 2018, Marcus had made over $200,000 selling fake alien artifacts. He'd used that money to fund his underground laboratory, buy equipment, and maintain his elaborate delusion. But the question everyone was asking was, did Marcus know it was fake? Was this a deliberate fraud, or had he genuinely convinced himself that what he'd created was real? Dr. Patricia Mills, a forensic psychiatrist, was brought in to evaluate Marcus. She spent 30 hours interviewing him over the course of 2 weeks. Her report painted a picture of a man who'd suffered a severe psychological break. Subject exhibits signs of delusional disorder with grandiose features, Dr. Mills wrote. He appears to have constructed an elaborate fantasy following his dismissal from NASA, unable to accept the loss of status and purpose that defined his identity. The creation of Subject Alpha and the subsequent decade of research provided him with a sense of importance and mission that he'd lost. Over time, the fantasy became indistinguishable from reality in his mind. The FBI dug deeper into Marcus's past. They interviewed Catherine, his ex-wife. She told them about the change she'd seen in Marcus after he started believing in government cover-ups. "It was gradual," she said. "First, it was just interest in UFO cases. Then it became obsession. Then he started talking about how he could prove it, how he could be the one to expose the truth. I think losing his job broke something in him. Being dismissed as a crank, being pushed out of the career he'd devoted his life to. He couldn't accept that he'd thrown it all away for nothing." They found Marcus's workshop in his basement, where he'd built Subject Alpha. Molds, sculpting tools, reference materials from anatomy textbooks and science fiction films, journal entries detailing the construction process, written in a way that made it clear he'd been building something, not preserving something he'd found. But here's what made everyone involved in this case feel sick. There was a journal entry from March 16, 2008, one day before Marcus claimed to have found the alien. It read, "Final preparations complete. Tomorrow, Subject Alpha is discovered. Tomorrow, everything changes." Marcus had planned the fake discovery. He'd created the specimen, built the story, and then convinced himself it was real. Over 10 years, he'd committed so completely to the delusion that he'd genuinely forgotten it was his own creation. The evidence against Marcus was overwhelming, but the prosecution faced a unique challenge. How do you charge a man who might legitimately believe his own lies? The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Wade decided on a multi-pronged approach: fraud for the fake artifacts he'd sold, theft for the primate remains stolen from the university, desecration of human remains for the other biological materials he'd used, possession of stolen government property for the classified equipment he'd acquired illegally, and illegal disposal of biological material for the way he'd stored everything in his underground lab. And then there was the surveillance footage from the cemetery. Remember that video from the pre-intro? The one showing Marcus entering the cemetery on November 2nd, 2018, carrying a metal case? The FBI reviewed hundreds of hours of cemetery surveillance. That night, less than 24 hours before his arrest, Marcus had brought something new to the laboratory. When agents searched the underground chamber, they found the case. Inside were additional tissue samples Marcus claimed to have just analyzed, but forensic testing showed these were also fabricated, created in his basement workshop just days before. Marcus had still been building his delusion, right up until the moment he was caught. During a search of Marcus's home computer, forensic specialists found something that explained the elaborate nature of Subject Alpha. Marcus had been documenting the entire construction process, not as documentation that it was fake, but as analysis of the specimen. Photographs showed the specimen in various stages of completion, but Marcus had titled them as if they were examination photos. Initial assessment of Subject Alpha's cranial structure. Detailed analysis of Subject Alpha's dermis layer. He'd been photographing himself building it, but telling himself he was studying it. Dr. Mills's psychiatric evaluation concluded that Marcus had developed what she called induced delusional disorder. The stress of his NASA dismissal, combined with his existing obsession with UFO phenomena, had caused a break with reality. Creating Subject Alpha had been, initially, perhaps a way to cope, to create proof of what he wanted to believe. But over time, the act of creating it had been replaced in his memory with the act of discovering it. Mr. Vellinger is not malingering, Dr. Mills testified at his competency hearing. He genuinely believes he discovered an extraterrestrial being. His mind has rewritten his own history to support this belief. He's created an alternative reality and exists within it. The judge ordered Marcus to undergo treatment at a federal psychiatric facility before standing trial, but the charges stood, because even if Marcus believed his delusion, he'd still committed real crimes, stolen real materials, sold fake artifacts to real people, created a health hazard with the biological materials. 6 months after his arrest, Marcus was found competent to stand trial. His defense attorney argued for insanity, presenting Dr. Mills's evaluation, but the prosecution had those journal entries, the planning, the deliberate construction, the systematic fraud. The jury had to decide, was Marcus Vellinger a con artist who'd crafted an elaborate hoax, or was he a mentally ill man who'd lost himself in his own creation? The trial of Marcus Vellinger lasted 3 weeks in federal court in New Mexico. The prosecution presented the evidence, the constructed nature of Subject Alpha, the stolen materials, the fraudulent artifact sales, the journal entries showing premeditation. The defense presented psychiatric testimony and argued that Marcus's mental illness prevented him from forming criminal intent, that he'd suffered a break with reality and couldn't be held responsible for actions taken while delusional. The jury deliberated for 14 hours. They found Marcus Vellinger guilty on all counts except fraud. On the fraud charges, they found him not guilty by reason of insanity, accepting that he genuinely believed he was selling real alien artifacts, even though he'd created them himself. On June 15, 2019, Marcus Vellinger was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for theft, desecration of remains, illegal disposal of biological material, and possession of stolen government property. The judge ordered that he continue psychiatric treatment while incarcerated. Marcus showed no emotion when the sentence was read. His only statement to the court was, "History will prove me right. When humanity finally makes contact, they'll know I was telling the truth." Subject Alpha. The elaborate construction that Marcus had convinced himself was proof of extraterrestrial life was transferred to the Smithsonian's Museum Support Center, where it remains in storage as evidence. Dr. Sarah Chen wrote a paper about the case examining how cognitive biases and mental illness can create seemingly unshakable false beliefs. The UFO community was divided. Some believed Marcus had really found an alien and that the government had covered it up by claiming it was fake. Others saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and conspiracy thinking. Catherine Vellinger, Marcus's ex-wife, gave one interview after the trial. "I grieve for the man he used to be," she said. "The brilliant scientist who wanted to understand the universe. That man died years ago. What's left is someone lost in a world of his own making, unable to find his way back to reality." Marcus Vellinger was convicted of theft of biological specimens, desecration of human remains, illegal disposal of biological material, and possession of stolen government property. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity on multiple counts of fraud. He received 18 years in federal prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. The case of Marcus Vellinger serves as a stark reminder of how the line between scientific pursuit and delusion can become terrifyingly blurred. How a brilliant mind can turn against itself when belief becomes more important than evidence, and how sometimes the most elaborate conspiracies aren't government cover-ups. They're the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a world that's rejected us. St. Mary's Cemetery has been permanently sealed. The underground laboratory was dismantled, the tunnels filled in, the mausoleum locked. The Vellinger family plot stands quiet now, keeping whatever secrets remain beneath the earth. And somewhere in a federal prison psychiatric ward, Marcus Vellinger still believes he discovered something extraordinary beneath that graveyard. Still believes that one day the truth will come to light, still waiting for vindication that will never come. Because the most tragic thing about Marcus Vellinger's story isn't that he created an elaborate hoax, it's that he convinced himself so completely that it was real, he lost the ability to recognize his own reflection in what he'd made. A man who searched for truth among the stars and found only the depths of his own fractured mind.